What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Fireside Giants. I'm your host, Anthony Rivardo, joined by my co-host, Alex Wilson. Today, we're going to be taking a look at some of the takeaways from Joe Schoen's press conference. The NFL Scouting Combine is kicking off this week. Tomorrow, the first wave of drills will begin. Joe Schoen is there. The New York Giants are there to scout some of the top prospects in this year's draft class. And Joe Schoen was able to do a press conference yesterday and had some really interesting quotes as he looked ahead to the offseason, gave a little bit of an idea as to what the Giants' plans are. He talked about Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones, contract negotiations, and a whole lot more. So we're going to go ahead and dive into some of that and look at the main takeaways from his press conference. But before we do that, Alex, how are you doing today, my friend?
Everything's going well, man. Just kind of getting along here. Giants obviously walking away with some big takeaways from Joe Schoen's press conference yesterday at the Combine. And he had some really interesting things to say about Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley, Leonard Williams. Overall, talking about the wide receivers situation, how they need support there. There's a lot of needs. This team has a lot of needs, and this upcoming draft class is going to be integral to their success in building the foundation. Now, I will say this, last year's draft class obviously was very injured. We talked about this yesterday to a degree. And now this offseason, you have a new, fresh 11 picks, barring any trades, that will need to step up and make an impact. We need to find some starters for once in the mid rounds. We have been so bad, it's just so unbelievably bad at finding starters in the mid rounds. And whenever we do, we find ways to trade them off. BJ Hill is the one that stands out to me. We send him to Cincinnati, ends up playing a pretty big part for them in their Super Bowl runs. And then we get Billy Price in return. The Giants have just really hurt themselves in the mid rounds in the past. And hopefully Joe Schoen, Brandon Brown, a lot of these really great coaches and general managers and assistant managerial positions are able to contribute toward a far more refined plan. Now, last year, we hired Joe Schoen, Brian Table, all these guys, and the draft was literally like on our doorstep, right? They did not have a full season to prepare for that, have a full season to put together what positions they need to address, where they kind of have to allocate resources. But now we do. Now they have that sample size. And Joe Schoen knows for a fact this team has a lot of needs. And he said he's not going to go away from essentially going for the best player available. He said specifically yesterday, I know receiver keeps coming up. We still have a lot of needs. I'm still taking the best player available wherever we are. And we'll continue to look, we'll continue to build. So that's a pretty, apparent statement that's pretty indicative of the fact that they're going to go with a BPA approach, and they're not going to go for, we need a receiver, let's go and get the best receiver available. If it so happens that the receiver that's on the board is also the best player available in their opinion, then it just works out perfectly like that. But it seems like they're going to go with the kind of mentality that we want the best possible player at that position, or really at that spot, 25th overall. And we're going to go from there, Anthony. So, what are your thoughts about that? Not necessarily drafting for a big need that we have to address this offseason, instead going with, be just about the best player and the highest probability of this guy becoming an all-pro level talent.
Yeah, I think that going best player available is the move, and it's the right way to build a team. I agree with Joe Schoen in terms of that philosophy. But there is also another quote that kind of relates to the one you just mentioned, talking about the wide receiver position, that really caught my eye from Joe Schoen yesterday. He said, quote, Daves is great about that. Again, he wants guys who can separate. If you can separate, no matter how tall, short, wide, if you can separate, we'll find a way to use them within the offense, whether it's outside, inside, or slots. That's one of the unique skills that Dable has, is taking the players and the skill set that he has and developing the offense around their skill set. So I really like that quote because, yes, talking about best player available, that is important that the Giants make sure that they hit on every draft pick, but also when they do go out there and find their wide receiver, it's, they're obviously going to draft a wide receiver at some point in this draft, whether it be in the first, second, or third round, they're going to draft a wide receiver. But now we know that the approach isn't necessarily getting a big body contested catch guy, right? Like a Kenny Golladay type where you just force it, get the biggest body you can and just hope that he can make contested catches. I like the approach that the Giants are taking where they're looking at separators. And I think that's something that we knew they were going to do, but hearing Joe Schoen say it, reading that he said that, I think is really key because when you look at some of the top receivers in this year's class, there are some wide receivers who are your big body contested catch guys, but then there's other wide receivers who are maybe very undersized, very small, and there are question marks about how they can compete at the next level, but they're very good separators. And I think that Joe Schoen is going to take those separators over those big body guys, even if they are really small and there are question marks about their ability to compete against outside cornerbacks in the NFL. So I really like that quote. I'm curious to know, Alex, what you think of that quote and if maybe any wide receivers in this draft class come to mind after hearing it.
Look, if the Giants are going to be drafting BPA at 25, there are a couple of receivers who could be on the board that would be considered the top players available, on anyone's given board. It could be Quentin Johnston. It could be Jordan Addison. It could be Zay Flowers. It could be Jalen Hyatt. There is a ton of guys who could be there at 25. I don't think, JSN, a lot of people have him mocked above them, but who knows? Maybe there's concerns about him and he drops to 25. Like, there are players that will be there that could easily be considered the best player available at that given moment. So it could just turn out the way that we all hope it does, and they give Daniel Jones or whoever the hell plays quarterback, most likely DJ, obviously, based on some of the quotes that we're going to read from you in a second, that they get him some support in the receiver unit. So to go on with one of the quote right after that, he says, "We'll be patient. When the value matches up to where we think the player is, we'll try to make the sound decisions and continue to build." So clearly, they're going to kind of let things come to them, but they're going to have a draft board that obviously has their preferences on it. So, there's definitely a lot of things that they want to do. And this is another interesting quote when it comes, and I think you actually just read this in terms of, wanting guys that can separate. If you can separate, no matter how tall, short, wide, if you can separate, we'll find a way to use them. So obviously, they're not really concerned about, getting a guy in the first round. They just want a guy that's going to get open. And obviously, they got Wan'Dale Robinson in the second round last year, very capable of getting open, but the injury definitely sets him back a little bit. But there's another player I do want to discuss that they did hit on, Leonard Williams. Eventually, I do want to get to the DJ and Saquon talk, but just a little bit of a side step because we're so always focused on those two. Leonard Williams isn't really going anywhere, apparently. So, that's kind of if you were on the boat of keeping Leo, then you're going to be very happy about this. I think most people are pretty happy about this because he's probably going to get restructured. Now, Shane did say that they have a significant lack of depth on the defensive line, so letting one of your best players go certainly isn't ideal. He does have a $32.26 million cap hit, so they're going to have to reduce that, but the exact quote was, "That is a premium position." Again, talk about allocating resources to a position. That's important. We got to be better next year stopping the run. I think some of that is our depth, where Dexter Lawrence doesn't have to play the amount of snaps he played, or Leo doesn't have to be out there as much as he was out there. That's important, not only there, but we have to improve the depth across the board. So keeping Leo seems to be a priority. And I'll tell you this right now, it looks like they're going to be drafting some defensive tackles, defensive interior guys to help stop the run. How important do you think that is? Because we really got crushed against the run last year. That was one of the variables that really was a weakness week in and week out. Keeping Leo, totally on board for that, especially if they can manage to reduce that cap hit, and then adding some depth in the draft to help stop the run also seems like a priority.
Yeah, and it should be. And I mean, I've been advocating for keeping Leonard Williams. I don't think that cutting him would be a good idea. I want to see him back with the team, and it sounds like he's going to be back with the team. So that's exciting. But in terms of stopping the run, yes, the Giants did struggle with that. And it's hard to judge whether that was defensive line or whether that was linebacker or a combination of both, most likely. I mean, we know that we had Leonard Williams and we had Dexter Lawrence, two of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL. But still, somehow the Giants weren't able to stop the run. So I think that the depth on the defensive line is important to take a look at, but also the linebacker position. When we look ahead to the scouting combine, I think that the Giants are probably going to be keeping their eyes on a lot of the top linebackers in this year's class. But for the defensive line, and when you take a look at that game against Philadelphia in the divisional round, when Dexter Lawrence wasn't on the field, the Giants would just get shredded in the running game on every single play. So when you look at some of these quotes from Joe Schoen, and he says it's not a position where we're very deep, we've got some ideas in mind, I think that tells you everything you need to know. The Giants need to add depth behind Leonard Williams. Keep Leonard Williams, keep Dexter Lawrence, put some good players behind those guys, because in the postseason, they didn't have that. They had no depth, and that really hurt them in the running game. So I think that it's super important that the Giants go into this draft class, maybe in those late rounds, 5th, 6th round, wherever they can find some value at that defensive line position. They need to add some more talent there behind Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence to really make sure that this defense doesn't get ran all over like it did in the postseason ever again. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see how the Giants allocate those resources. But yeah, for sure, I think they do need to draft at least 1 to 2 defensive linemen in this class.
Yeah, I'm on the same boat as you. And taking a look at some of the more interesting quotes. So Joe Schoen also spoke about losing leadership and, what it would be like to lose Jones or Saquon Barkley. He said it's not just what's on the field with some of these guys. It's the leadership in the locker room and within their position group. You've really got to make sure you don't let a lot of leadership walk out of the building. We want to definitely be able to retain some of that leadership. So he definitely noted John Feliciano and Jihad Ward very cheap guys. Would not be surprised if both of those guys were retained. Obviously, Jones and Barkley are the more intricate conversations to have. And it seems like they're playing second fiddle to Barkley. They're waiting for Jones to kind of sign a deal, and they're not afraid to use the franchise tag to keep him out of free agency. Barkley, on the other hand, it doesn't seem like there's going to be a franchise tag usage. I mean, he said they're open to using it on either, but I think Jones, obviously they would prefer to, keep him locked in if they have a choice. They also said there is a walkaway number for Barkley. Like there is a number where they're like, we cannot do this. This is not a good financial decision for our team, for the position, whatever it might be. That walkaway number, who knows what it is? It could be 13.5 million. It could be 13 million. But Saquon's going to have to make a decision. Do I go and test the market and see if I can get more, or do I stay with the New York Giants and build a career in one of the most sought after markets in the world? Talk about his brand. If he goes to Cleveland, I'm just using Cleveland as an example. If he goes to a smaller city that's willing to pay him more, his brand is not going to be the same as it is if he stays with the Giants for the rest of his career. He will have longevity. So I think that there is something to be said about that, and the ad bucks and the sponsorship bucks he can earn long term. Not to say that he won't be a face of the league, but I definitely think in New York he definitely has more sway in the public arena. But another quote that's kind of interesting about the interior offensive line, that's a position that we've really been concerned about. Center, left guard specifically, it seems like they don't feel as though Mark Lewinsky is going to be moved anytime soon, because if you do cut him this offseason, you actually end up paying more. So he's going to be our right guard next year, guys. So I wouldn't expect much changes there. But he said we have really good depth. It won't prevent us from, if there's a guy out there in the interior that we really want to sign, from doing that. But I think we have some pieces there. There's going to be good competition at center and left guard this offseason, which makes me think Feliciano and Gates will likely be back because they're cheap. They both are able to compete, and they're both starting caliber centers in their own right. I think Feliciano really came into his own towards the end of the season. He looked pretty solid, actually. He didn't give up many pressures. He looked in flow with Daniel Jones. So I was very much impressed by the last few games there, and I think this was his first season playing center, so it's fair to give him a year to really get his feet under him, and I think he definitely got it kind of down towards the end of the year, so I'd be willing to re-sign him and let him compete for the starting center position. Now, there is a couple more things that are kind of interesting regarding the Dexter Lawrence, Andrew Thomas, Xavier McKinney signings, or rather extension talks, and he said the Giants will most likely exercise Thomas's fifth-year option, which I believe is like somewhere between $70 to $20 million, and they want to get deals done with Thomas and McKinney, but they're going to have to wait a little bit. He said we've got more pressing needs right now, but those are the guys that we'll consider down the road. Next offseason, I imagine that's probably what we're looking at. But Anthony, just based on the fact that they're thinking about getting those deals done, specifically Dexter, Thomas, and McKinney, how important do you think that is, knowing that they're already starting to think about, we are going to have to extend some of our youth guys that are really meaningful and we just can't let walk because they're so important to this team?
I mean, I think it's really important, and I think that taking a look at all of these quotes together and seeing that Joe Schoen is pointing out that they need to lock down these guys in the future, while also pointing out that he has a walkaway number with Saquon Barkley, is very telling. I think that they have everything in mind. They don't want to tie up too much money into one player, especially a running back. I think that really I'm looking at all of these quotes, and I'm getting the sense that the Giants aren't too keen on re-signing Saquon Barkley, is how I'm starting to feel. And I think that they would much rather extend guys like Andrew Thomas and Xavier McKinney than keep Saquon Barkley. And I know that ties into the leadership quotes that he had, talking about, not wanting to lose leadership, but there's a lot that goes into the conversations with Saquon Barkley, Daniel Jones, and now Joe Schoen is kind of revealing that maybe some of the reporters who are claiming that there's no doubt Saquon Barkley is going to be a New York Giant, maybe they're wrong, because it sounds like Joe Schoen is definitely not had his mind made up on Saquon Barkley. But I do think it's important for the Giants to be looking ahead to the future. We did the episode yesterday talking about the salary cap space. The Giants have a lot of it over the next 3 years. But again, we also talked about how the Giants have a lot of in-house talent that they need to extend. Saquon Barkley is one of those guys. Daniel Jones is one of those guys. Julian Love is a player who didn't even get brought up in these quotes from what I see, and that's another player that the Giants have to consider whether or not they want to extend, because if they don't, well, now they have a massive need at safety that needs to be addressed in the draft. So I think that's another player that needs to be brought in mind here. But looking at guys like Andrew Thomas, Dexter Lawrence, Xavier McKinney, they're going to all get paid really big time contracts. I mean, when you look at what Dexter Lawrence just did this past season, if he replicates that again this upcoming year, he is going to reset the market on interior defensive linemen. And the same thing with Andrew Thomas. If he has another year like the one that he just had, he will reset the market on left tackles. Those two guys guys are some of the best players in the sport, and they're going to get paid like it. So I do think it's important that Joe Schoen is taking a look at those players, Xavier McKinney included, and just making sure that the money is right for the future, because they do need to get these guys. There are more pressing needs. Joe Schoen is right. Wide receiver is a more pressing need. I would argue that interior offensive line, Joe Schoen, he's going to be he's going to be cordial about it, say that they have good depth there. It's a more pressing need. But the Giants do need to build for the future. That's what Joe Schoen's main theme and message was throughout this press conference, was that they have to build the right way and build toward the future. And keeping guys like Andrew Thomas, Xavier McKinney, and Dexter Lawrence in mind, that helps them build toward the future and really keep this roster intact with those core guys and continue to build on it and create success that is sustainable year in and year out. So I do think it's important to hear that he has those guys in mind, but I'm very curious to see how the Saquon Barkley contract affects those guys.
I mean, it's definitely going to affect them. And then Daniel Jones's contract's going to affect them too. But, this is going to be a really fun and yet very interesting offseason. Usually there's a lot of leaks and there's a lot of rumors and news about what the Giants are going to do, what they're thinking of doing, and where they're looking. They have kept this thing air freaking tight. All the news that we've heard has been from bullshit outside sources that don't know anything, right? $45 million. Now that's been debunked. That was his old agent saying something, right? Then there's this and there's that and this much money. And then there's, Pat McAfee saying, oh, it's going to be coming in a lot less. Nobody knows anything. They have kept this thing air freaking tight with Saquon, with Daniel Jones, and the rest of these guys. And that's how it's supposed to be. If you give any of these guys leverage, they will take advantage of it. Whether it's a player agent, whether it's the team. And I think that they've done a really good job of keeping it in-house. And while it doesn't offer us a lot of news to talk about, because we're kind of regurgitating things that are just happening and rumors and whatnot, I do like the fact that the professionalism has elevated in the building. People obviously are trusted not to say anything. There's no leaks. They found all the rats. And now I feel as though we can go into the future with that a little bit of anonymity and understanding that no one else is going to get the better of us because they found out something because we had rats in the building. Now we're locked down. We know what we're doing. The Eagles aren't going to leapfrog us for freaking Devonta Smith. We're not going to get leapfrog for Micah Parson. We're not going to make dumb decisions that allow other teams to have advantages over us. We're just going to protect what we can protect, and it'll end up being beneficial that way. So I'm very excited to see kind of how the Giants go about this offseason, how the draft unfolds, and really who they end up taking to support Daniel Jones in this offense, because that obviously is a priority, Anthony. But I'll let you wrap us up here. Appreciate everyone for tuning into this episode. Definitely a lot of interesting quotes and takes from Joe Schoen.
Yeah, definitely a lot, and I think that it's great to keep in mind that the scouting combine is coming up, and there's always players who rise up the draft board, and there's other players who will fall down the draft board. So, I mean, Joe Schoen gave us a good idea as to what he's looking for in the scouting combine. He did mention that wide receiver is a position of need, interior offensive line is something they're going to address, depth on the defensive line. So I guess now we have an idea going into the scouting combine what the Giants are going to be scouting and who they're going to be looking at, and I think that'll really start to take shape over the next few days, and then as we get into the draft, it's going to be really interesting and exciting. But keep in mind, free agency right around the corner. Saquon Barkley and Daniel Jones are dangerously close to hitting the open market. Those deals have to get done ASAP. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. And of course, we are going to update you on all of that right here on Fireside Giants. So make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this episode, and subscribe to the channel if you're new, and ring the bell so you don't miss an episode. We'll catch you all on the next one. Have a good one, and let's go Giants.